Thank you. Start of our annual organizational meeting, but at this time, three newly elected board members, I'd like to have them take the oath of office. You please stand. Stay where you are, yes. As Again, as we were getting started, I do want to welcome our student on the board, and Azariah, welcome, and I hope you have a wonderful evening with us, and we are glad to have you here for our board meeting. At this time, I'd like to take a nomination for board president. Is there a nomination for board president? Mark Thorne? Mike Marizzo, is there a second? Amanda, all in favor? Okay. Gavel that? So moved. Also, I'd like to take nominations for vice president. Bob Crabtree, Xavier, second. Beth Kramer, all in favor? Okay, will the vice president and president please stand? Okay, so we're gonna play some musical chairs and the president, the gavel is yours.
Hey, thank you, Dan. Before we move forward with the organizational meeting, I just want to take a minute to thank Paul for his leadership over the last several years as president of this board. Taken us through quite a ride with a lot of stuff that's gone on. So I just want to thank you for everything that you've done. And we have a gift for you.
This is my second set of these. I have one from some other stuff from years ago with a different logo on it, but I won't talk about that. But thank you. No, my pleasure. I'm happy to take a break, and I'm sure we're in really good hands. And there's a cake somewhere, or did we forget that? Ice cream. Thank you.
Okay, next we have the appointment of the Board of Education Audit Committee. This includes the board president, vice president, and a community member who is Mike Schuster. Do I have a motion to accept that? Mr. Crabtree, second. Josh, all those in favor? I'm going to ask that we group the majority of these items, sections as they're labeled out on the organizational meeting. I like to take 5.01 down to 5.26 as a group. Do I have a motion to accept that unless anyone has a specific item they'd like to discuss separately? Do I have a motion? Xavier, Mark, all those in favor? Unanimous. 5.27, the approval of the Town of Cicero Special Patrol Officer Agreement. Do I have a motion to put that on the table? Paul, Josh, all those in favor? I'm going to abstain from that. I would like to group all the items in 6, so 6.01 through 6.03 together. Do I have a motion to do that? Beth, Amanda, all those in favor? Authorizations, 7.01 through 7.09. Does anyone need anything separated out in that grouping? Do I have a motion to accept those as a group? Josh, Mark, all those in favor? Also. And 8.01, the readoption of all of the Board of Education policies. This is our current set as it is now. We're working with Area 1 that should be coming up relatively soon. Policy manual. Do I have a motion to put that before us? Xavier, Paul, all those in favor? That is. At this time, I would like to adjourn the annual organizational meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn this portion of the meeting? Beth, thank you. All those in favor? Two. So we'll move now to the normal Board of Education meeting. We've already done the Pledge of Allegiance, so we don't need to do that again. I'd like to have a moment of silence for the following individuals. Patricia Moak, an employee of the North Syracuse Central School District. David Woodworth, a graduate of the North Syracuse Central School District and former student of Mr. Crabtree. Calvin Dorn, a retiree of the North Syracuse Central School District. John Kolodeski, a graduate of the North Syracuse Central School District. Tyler Mosier, a graduate of the North Syracuse Central School District. Barbara Ross, a graduate of the North Syracuse Central School District. Anthony Orzo, a graduate of the North Syracuse Central School Districts. And James Pagoda, a graduate of the North Syracuse Central School District.
Mr. President, I'd like to speak on Tyler Mosier. I knew Tyler through a couple athletics that I played. I played football with him. He was 4 grades, I believe, above me, and then I also was on the track team with him. And when I tell you that Tyler was one of the most special athletes I've ever seen, and that's not an understatement. He went on to move to throw at Utica for 4 years after retiring from his football career. And not only was he a great athlete, he was the biggest teddy bear, most loving, caring guy that I've really ever known. Everybody kind of looked up to him in awe when he was around us. I mean, the room would gravitate towards him when he'd walk into a room. He's going to be missed heavily. I graduated with his brother, who was also a friend of mine, and I feel for Adam and his entire family. And he's got great parents, and I know they've got a great support system, but I really do give my thoughts and prayers to the Mosier family.
We have 2 presentations this evening. The first is our fire inspection report, and we have Darren, and if you want to come up and.
And I have Mike Bonville here with us from BOCES, who really did most of the work. But we have successfully completed our fire inspections for the 24-25 school year. Any infractions that we found have been corrected and re-inspected where needed. SED has all the paperwork, and we have certificates of occupancy for all of our buildings. This year with St. Margaret's coming on board, we will be inspecting that building before we take occupancy in the fall. And construction project going on at the high school. As the sections are turned over to us, we will be inspecting those as they get. Have anything?
Sounds like it went pretty smooth.
It did this year.
Are there any areas that we had to put emphasis or concern?
No more than normal, there's housekeeping items and nothing of great concern that we were worried about.
Was it just, I'm sorry, typical to find ones and twos?
It
Hopefully
is.
not threes, but I assume with the construction.
Rare occasions you may find those. I think we had one or two of those, but yeah, typically the ones or twos and they're quick and easy cleanups, nothing.
One like, for example, maybe somebody with an illegal coffee pot. Just trying to get an example in my mind. 'Cause
I'll defer to you for the ones and twos.
I lost a couple coffee pots in my day, so there's a person, you know.
The point scale is a little arbitrary, but it's based on severity. So yeah, ones and twos, this could be anything from just emergency light battery went out or
Oh.
a fire door not latching properly. So that's really the majority of what we found. Welcome.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for your work.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, next I'd like to welcome Dr. Matt Cook from OCM BOCES to discuss our next steps in the North Syracuse Central School District Superintendent search.
Thank you. All right, so I've got some handouts, so I'm going to pass those around. Thank you, sir. So I appreciate being able to be here and talk with you in open session about the process. And appreciate the vote of confidence last time when we talked about me doing the search with you. And I want to emphasize that the way I approach this is I am facilitating your search, right? This is not my search. This is your search. And so I will make sure that the process is as clean as possible, as transparent as possible, and as thorough as possible, because I think it's not an understatement to say that the most important role a Board of Education has is to hire a superintendent of schools. Once hired, then it's the evaluation and supervision of that person, but the hiring is key, right? And so for me, that's where I want to be able to start the conversation. So, and actually there should be probably one of those left over. No? There we go. Thank you, sir. I just want to make sure that I'm saying the same thing that you're seeing. So talking about the beginning of the process first, right? So the components of the process. We start with gathering information. And so we've already done some of that. We've already started to have some conversations. You're also seeing a brochure. It's a draft of a brochure, right? And so our team, our marketing team worked with your team and Lori to be able to put together this draft. So we want to make sure that that's to your liking. The advertising, the application process, we handle all of that. The initial screening interviews, I do all of those and then report that back to you. And then the board does the first round of screening for sure. Then there's the decision process and then an announcement, right? So all of that is essentially makes up the components of the process. So as we move on to the next slide in the gathering information piece. So there will be conversations with the board about what are the things that are most important to you in terms of characteristics, right? But we also need to gather that information from other groups, right? So we're going to do some combination of surveying and probably focus groups that come out of that with the different stakeholder groups and constituencies. So that's obviously staff, instructional staff, non-instructional staff, incredibly important. I'd love to be able to talk to students. It's a little harder in the summer, but it's not impossible. So we want to make sure that we do some of that. And I've had some experience being able to do that and get some good feedback from students. We all obviously want to talk to parents and community members. They're key constituents as well. And then, elected officials, business officials, community partners, all of those kinds of folks. So there will be opportunities for those folks to be able to provide input and feedback into the process all along. My experience with surveys, yeah, Paul.
Just on the student piece, what age groups, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, I just figured you'd want questions along the way.
Let's do it that way.
But, okay, what ages of students? You have a student on the board here,
Yeah.
so I thought maybe we're talking about, what age group do you look at in your experience typically? I'm sure you don't go down too far.
It's a little hard to get below middle school, but I do like to go to middle school. I think middle school kids have a lot of insight. I think you facilitate it a little bit differently, right? So, you know, I was an elementary school social worker who spent a lot of time with middle school students, so have some experience with that. I've also been able to facilitate some groups to get input in other searches from middle school and high school students. I think younger than that's a little tricky, but middle school to high school, those students are invested in the process, right? This is going to be the leader that takes them through, you know, their school experience.
Mentioned it's tough to get them in the summer. I'm just wondering what structures do we have in place, like principals, cabinets and such, but do they have to elect or appoint when we get to the new year? Do we have anything now we can get to? And you can answer, you can certainly chime in anytime you want, but
I can't speak for Kristen as far as her principal's cabinet, but I can tap in to my superintendent student advisory committee. We had 4 who graduated,
okay.
but there are still middle school on up that are still on the group. So
Oh, okay,
that-
so we have that in place,
Yeah.
and we certainly would want our ex officio board member, if you wanted to, I'm not forcing. you, but-
So I can also talk a little bit about what I've done in other searches, because I'd love to talk to those students for sure. But I also have specifically tried to get a cross-section of cliques, a cross-section of different kinds of groups of kids. And I've tried to do the same thing when I've gotten, when we've put together parent groups. So what I have done in the past and what I would love to be able to talk with you about and your administrative team about is process, right? But, you know, one of the things that I will ask for is I want to talk to kids who aren't just the highest achieving kids, right? I want to talk to kids who sort of cut across the different spans of academic performance, of even behavioral performance, of interest in groups and clubs, to make sure that we're getting a little bit of everybody. And I have been not surprised really, but very pleased that when you sit down with a group of principals and they know their buildings and they know their kids and certainly they know their counselors who know the kids even better sometimes, and they're able to say, okay, yeah, if we reach out to X, Y, or Z, we can put together a group of, you know, 12 to 14 kids who are going to represent, you know, cross-section in this building or in these grades. And then we'd be able to drill down a little bit deeper. And I think that doing that gives you, the board, the kind of information that you're looking for that's a little more well-rounded. So I would like to operate a similar kind of process if that's possible here.
Great, thank you.
So from that information, you know, that produces a tremendous amount of information that comes back to the board, right? And so then it's on you to look through it. And so we would carve out some time to be able to make sure that that happened. And from that, you'd be able to get a sense of the characteristics of the kinds of candidates that the community is looking for and that each of those stakeholder groups is looking for. And that's really going to drive a lot of the process. And that gets into what we're going to talk about next in terms of which kind of search that we're going to talk about, because there's an open search and then there's a confidential search. And I want to make sure that I describe that as thoroughly as I can and the pros and cons of that. So in an open search, and these are just terms, right? It's sort of terrible that they're used this way because it makes it sound as if one is not, you know, you're trying not to be open, but the way that is termed is that's what you think of as the traditional superintendent search, right? Where the candidates essentially remain confidential until the final round. And then there's usually 2 to 4 finalist candidates that are announced. Most places it's 2 to 3, but I say 2 to 4 because I don't want to restrict. You have, you know, your finalist candidates, and then you have panels of those stakeholder groups that do an interview with those candidates, right? An interview process. Now, if we went that direction, I would facilitate those interviews. I would work with the constituency groups and the stakeholder groups to shape questions, but I would be responsible for developing the questions with those groups And I would be in every one of those interviews because you can't be. And I would make sure that you got all of the notes and all of the feedback and a summary from how each of those interviews went, right? So that's a little bit laborious and it takes a little bit longer. The advantage is that it gives you firsthand feedback on specific candidates from constituency groups that are important to the district. The downside is that it will shrink the candidate pool in one category in particular, and that tends to be sitting superintendents. So in a district that is a small district that is more what you think of as a starter district, that might not be an issue for a board of education. You might be thinking, all right, it's unlikely for us to get sitting superintendents in say Cincinnatus. So, that might not be as big a deal. North Syracuse is likely to get a pretty deep and pretty diverse pool, which I think is good. But you're going to limit the number of potential applicants in that category. And so if that's important to the board, then the confidential search process is the process that is favored right now. And I would say regionally, at least half of the searches are now confidential. And generally speaking, in the larger suburban districts, you see that more and more because of what I'm describing. And so it's becoming more the norm. I know some search consultants who will only do a confidential search. They don't want to do the open searches anymore. So that's interesting, but I'm not there. Like I said at the beginning, I'm facilitating your search. And so I'm just trying to outline for you the pros and the cons of both of these things. I do have some information that I can share in executive session about potential candidates' interest, but I'm not going to be able to speak about that obviously publicly because at least half, and actually more than half of this process will be an executive session because it's essentially a personnel action and we're going to be talking about specific candidates and that can't happen in an open session. Yeah, Xavier,
Just to clarify, Matt,
please.
I just want to talk on the word choice you used. So you said will and going to and not might when it comes to limiting the pool. So just to clarify, you're for sure saying we will lose out on some of those candidates.
I am aware of sitting superintendents who are not going to apply if it is an open search.
Thank you. I just wanted a little bit of clarification on that.
Can I add something just because I struggled with this because when I first heard it, I thought, well, obviously we're going to do open search. Why would we not? Or until I talked to Dan and Matt, we talked about this and you did say what you just talked about. I happened to run into another superintendent who knew that I know that when I was out and he was aware of Dan's retirement. I won't call it resignation. He's not a quitter. But, and I asked him that question and he said, absolutely. He said, absolutely. There are people that, because I'd never apply for he's a current superintendent and he never apply for not that I was questioning that you said that, but it was interesting to somebody who's not interested in applying here, by the way, because I said that jokingly. But just clear, it was clear. I didn't even finish the sentence. And that kind of opened my eyes more that I want to do what's best for the district. And I think a deep pool, as deep as possible. I struggle with the process, but I think we do that first part you talked about. We do it properly with fidelity.
So let's talk about that a little bit, right? Because if it's a confidential search, then we front load the process with information from stakeholder groups. And we dive deeper than we would otherwise, because we would still do a survey regardless, but we probably wouldn't do as many focus groups and if we went with the open search where we knew that the stakeholder groups were going to have a process of interviewing the candidates at the end, that's the reason that you wouldn't have to dive as deep into focus groups. You'd still want some of that survey information at the beginning to help you shape the selection process and getting the candidates down to the finalists, but you wouldn't need it as much. If you go with a confidential search, it means I'm going to spend a lot more time in North Syracuse this summer, but it also means that we're going to spend some time really trying to dive into that and make sure that we get you as much thorough information as you can about candidate profiles so that that process is fully informed as it can be, with the exception of, those groups wouldn't see the actual final candidates.
So I guess this is more of just a general comment to the board, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. So in some ways, it's almost more beneficial to be having all of the public input front loaded, where you're doing these focus groups and everything at the beginning. So when we're looking at it, let's say we have, 15 or 20 applications, we can look at all of those applications with the public's input in mind, versus if we were to do it the way that it's been done in the past, a lot of that wouldn't happen until the finalist candidates, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, with the only exception of, I would still do the initial survey to the constituency groups one way or the other, because I think that information would still inform you whittling down to the finalist candidates. But we probably wouldn't need to do focus groups in the same way, because you wouldn't need to dive as deep.
Clarify a little more. So in the confidential search, the word confidential just kind of throws everybody off.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of big and scary.
Well, I've also changed it from closed to
And that's
confidential.
even scary. So with this confidential search, you're still saying that stakeholders are still going to be a major part of who we choose ultimately
Right.
in the end, correct?
Where their input happens
Just different.
and what their input is about is a little different, right? So their input happens up front rather than at the end, and they don't get the chance to meet the final candidates. These are the questions that we need to ask, right? Because you need to be as clear as we can. And as a board, whichever direction you decide to go, that's however we call the play, that's what we'll implement. But if we go with the confidential search, I need to be able to look those candidates in the eye and say, the board has said this is going to be confidential, right? And they're trusting me and they're trusting you to have that happen.
What point would we need to make determination? Are you looking for direction from us tonight?
This tonight would be lovely. No later than this week, because it needs to be in the brochure, right? And I need to be able to say to the candidates, some of whom are waiting for a phone call after this meeting, what is that going to look like? Yeah.
Have you found that you've said that, and I don't know if you've done them specifically, but you've seen a lot of these confidential searches happening in some of the suburban
I've
districts?
done each kind.
Oh, okay. So have you seen that the results are, and I mean, generally, that in the confidential searches that that the public feels as if they're, what came out in those focus groups and things like that were actually represented in the superintendent that was picked?
That's the $1 million question. So I'm going to answer that as honestly and as diplomatically as I can, right? So I'll say this. I've never run or heard of a search where everybody at the end was satisfied. And I don't want to pretend otherwise, right? That's not being genuine. There are times where I've run an open search and we've had the constituency groups, and some of the constituency groups were upset because so-and-so wasn't picked to be on the committee and so-and-so was. And so, there's a world in which you're not going to be able to make everybody happy. And as a board, I think you inherently understand that. But I also want to be clear that in saying that, I think that, with a confidential search, if the community is trusting the board and is saying, we felt like we got a chance to say as much as we could up front, and we know why you're doing this, and it wouldn't necessarily have been your preference other than trying to get a deeper candidate pool, then my sense is most of them are going to be fine with it. You are going to hear from some people who aren't going to like it. There's no way around it. Especially because, if I understand correctly, North Syracuse hasn't done that before. And so this would be a little bit of a change.
So I guess just what I'd say
Yep.
to that is this district has a very deep history of shared decision making, various thresholds on this, with. So I think I share the same questions as the rest of the board. Is depending on either way we choose to go, is that shared decision making process still going to be heavily involved in either an open or a confidential? It's just one's going to be more front loaded.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And to be blunt, and this is the part that people push back on a little bit, they won't be able to have input on the finalist candidates.
And I
Maybe.
kind of want to speak on the open search a little bit.
Sure.
So with the open search, this isn't like, not to compare it to American Idol, but American Idol where you know your 20 candidates right off the bat. Open search is just, they know the finalists.
The
at
constituents
end.
will still only know the final.
Only know
Yeah.
the finalists.
Correct.
And when we say open, it's more of, it's still confidential, correct? It's still.
Confidential up until the
It-
last,
And just, but it's just
Right.
names, right? They don't get anything else besides like the public, not the stakeholder groups. but
Sure.
The public in general doesn't get anything else besides just names.
they would get
and
names, they would get bios, but once you have a name, you have
everything.
everything.
Correct. But it's still in a way, I just wanted to
Yep.
kind of point out that it's still in a way confidential.
Correct. Yeah, it's, the difference is in the final round.
Yeah.
And
okay.
that's where the difference is. And what I would still implore the board to do is to treat the whole process as confidential up until that final round. Primarily because, I've been through it a couple of times now, right? The process of applying to be a superintendent. It's horrible, right? I can't say it any other way in terms of like nerve wracking, and you put everything you have into it. You study deeply, you try to figure out whether or not it's the right fit for you. And then you walk through a gauntlet of emotions that go along with it. I give a tremendous amount of credit to anybody who is willing to sit in front of you and say, I'd like to be your next leader, right? And I want to make that as safe a space as humanly possible for all of the people who are going to be able to put themselves out there for your consideration.
And I guess I'm Mr. Question tonight. I apologize to everybody.
This is what this is for.
But before I ask this question, I just want to really make it clear that in no way do I distrust our community. But I want to ask a question on leaks. Have you ever lost a candidate from an open search because something got leaked during those stakeholder interviews? And like I said, I'm not saying I don't trust our.
Yeah, that's a great
community.
question. I have not lost a candidate once it got to the stakeholder interview part, because once you're in the stakeholder interviews, once I put a name in front of a group of people, even if I say to that group of people, anybody other than the board who is sworn to uphold executive session confidentiality, if I put a name in front of another group of people, it's assumed that it will get out, right? So that's how that works. I actually have a YouTube clip that I often show. I actually show it to my administrative team all the time, and we'll be happy to share with you. But essentially, it's this old show called Sports Night, right? An Aaron Sorkin show, and the managing editor of this fictional ESPN type studio is very mad. And he walks into his staff room and he says, "Listen, Dana, you're my second in command, and what I say to you behind closed doors has to stay behind closed doors." And Dana looks at her assistant Natalie and says, "Natalie, you're my assistant, and what I say to you has to stay confidential." And Natalie says, "Well, I only told Jeremy, he's my boyfriend." And Jeremy's sitting in the room and he says, "And I told many, many people." Right? That is how that goes in every human interaction in almost every way that I can think of. So have I seen this go bad? Yes. It almost always goes bad for one of two reasons. A board member says something to somebody that they trust, or a candidate says something to somebody that they trust. I've seen it happen both ways. Candidates have blown their own cover.
So I can tell you that at OCM BOCES that happened. Somehow we did a confidential search and a candidate withdrew. And we had a big problem. We ended up with getting a really great person, but we had
Thanks,
a
Bob.
tough time. Well, I'll take my money on. But my first search here, and I'm the only one that was here. George Harrington was with me. We had 7 candidates with a open search. We ended up with a candidate that this district struggled for 2 years with. I was not on the next one. You were on the last one. I know you didn't get a lot of applications. There are a lot of great, and he knows it, superintendents in this area in small schools that would really lead this school district. So I want you to know that. Thank you.
Did I hear correctly, and in regards to the confidential search, when it gets to the finalists, that stays.
That's, the confidential search is only the board all the way through.
Okay.
And it cannot be different. Because once it's in the brochure, that changes the applicant pool. Now, if it turns out that, you know, that there's a change of heart or there's mounting pressure or whatever, I will say to the candidates before we get to the last stage, this might change, and then you will see some of them drop out.
This might be a difficult question to answer, but do you know roughly how much smaller the candidate pool might get? I mean, I'm sure it's unpredictable, but are we looking
Yeah,
at like,
we're
we're gonna lose out on half the candidates?
That's the $1 million question. I wish I could give you an answer. I know of two. I'm sure that means that there are more because I haven't had that many conversations with people.
That alone is enough to answer my question. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could tell you that we'd get 25 and it would be down to 12, I can't,
I knew it was,
wish.
I know Mark earlier said there were no stupid questions. I knew I was about to ask a stupid question, but
that's
I
a great
did want to
question.
hear.
That's a question everybody's
I
wondering,
already
right?
thought I heard, did he hire the Cincinnati superintendent because of you?
Uh,
It is an example. You got to be careful because around here that it's already out there.
Yes, yes.
Never mind. It's out there now because I made a joke that didn't.
All right, so we don't have to decide right now, but in terms of where we're on the process, any other questions about open versus confidential searches? Okay, let me work through the rest of the document and we'll circle back to the decision. So in that document, the next is just a sample of the kind of survey feedback that you'd get, right? We're going to ask a bunch of different questions. You're going to be able to have input into that survey. We have a standard survey that we use and we've used for, you know, the last several searches, but we also have worked with boards to tweak some of the questions. There might be specific issues in your district that you want to make sure are highlighted or emphasized. So we'll make sure that happens. But you're going to get to see a lot of data that will come back out of the surveys and we'll ask and we'll give the surveys to different groups. And even though it's the summer, generally speaking, this is a topic that is important to people. So if you put something out on Parent Square or, you know, your communication system and with your staff, most people are still going to want to be able to answer it. And especially if it winds up being a confidential search, and it's communicated that this is your best way to start the process of getting feedback, then I'll start working with some of those constituency groups to make sure that we have people for focus groups to dive in deeper. But that's, you know, it's just a sample of the kind of information that you're going to get back. You know, that focus group and survey data is going to talk to you about qualities, characteristics, establishing your superintendent profile, right? And hopefully it's aligned to your vision. So that's what we're really looking to do. Walking through the rest of the process. So the applications come in. I do the screening of the applicants. Let's say we have 25 applicants. You are going to, as a board, get all 25 applicants, right? I do not hide any of them from anybody, right? You are going to know everybody who's applied. I will say to you, there's 25 applicants. 5 of these people I really think you should see. 5 of these people I really think are kind of a waste of your time. The other 10 are, you know, the other 15, let's see if I did the math right. Don, did I get that? The other 15, you know, that's the conversation. And that's typically how that goes, right? There will be some people who will apply in that 5, right, that I say is kind of a waste of your time that I already know. They apply for a lot of things. And I probably will say, you know, probably not worth your time. If you want to see those 5, you see those 5. I'm going to tell you what the screening process is like. I'm going to tell you if I have a strong favorable or unfavorable opinion, and I'm going to tell you why. But it's your decision. You make the decision based on all that information. Part of what you're paying me for, and by paying me, I mean not at all, but part of what you're getting is that process, right? Is my relationships, my connections, my work with some of these people already, but then you're also going to get 36 of my best friends, the other district superintendents across the state. And so if somebody applies from Long Island or from the North Country or from Buffalo, and I don't happen to know that person, guess what? everybody who does my job in all of those areas, they know them the same way I know everybody in this area. So we find out everything about the candidates. And so if there is something that's a little bit, questionable or that we want to dive in deeper about, we're going to be able to do that. There's also a pretty good national network. So we've sometimes had people apply from out of the state, and it's not too hard to reach out to colleagues in different parts of the state and say, what do you know about such and such, or what do you know about so and so? So, that process works the same way. Okay. But generally speaking, and I would say because of certification, it's pretty rare to get out of state applicants. It's not impossible, and North Syracuse is big enough where that might be interesting to people. But I'm going to guess 95% or more of the applications that are going to come in are from New York State applicants. It's how our system is structured and set up. It's hard to get your certification reciprocity. So then you will start, once we go through that process, you whittle it down from the 25, you say, we agree on here, it's the 13 you want to seek, right? We set that up. You work that process. Usually it's one interview. We're probably going to be able to cut that in half or roughly there. You might have another round where you're trying to dive down and drill down deeper to figure out who are the people that you really want in that process. And then we get down to, finals. And then like I said, that's typically somewhere between 2 and 4. And if it's an open search, then at that point is when the constituency groups come in and we do the meet the candidate day, and pretty grueling for those folks, but it's it can be a revealing process. And if it's not, then it's a last round with the board. We can also talk about where to have some of these conversations. You're close enough to our offices where I would kind of recommend using that. It's been my experience that when you do interviews in any part of the process that's confidential and you have them here, boy, is it going to be easy for people to want to nose around and find out who's walking in the door. So, when I did the marathon search, we did almost all of those meetings in Cortland because we didn't want anybody, small towns, right? You didn't want anybody to be able to sort of figure out what's going on. So I think that there's ways for us to keep this process very confidential. And so, whether it's us using, one of our offices or someplace else within the district, there's, I'm not above a little subterfuge when it comes to that. And then there you go. And then the last, piece just involves, the announcement, and we would work with Lori and your communications team to make sure that, that gets announced how you want it announced. Next document I had was just a little bit of a tweaked sample timeline, right? It seems like last time when we talked, we were leaning towards that more abbreviated timeline, sort of what I would call the typical timeline for a potential January 1st start. So this sort of outlines what that would look like. If we know this week the answers to these questions, we should be able to get the vacancy announcement out and printed by the end of the week and get the ball rolling. Word is already out, obviously, because I know, I've had conversations. Seems like Paul's had conversations, right? That's sort of how this starts to work. So you can sort of look through that to see what the timeline is, but that's not terribly changed from the last conversation we had. And then the last handouts that we had for you just involved the sample brochure, which I'd like you to be able to take a look through. Like I said, pretty standard, and we did already work with Lori on it. So, we know it's had some North Syracuse eyes on it. And then you see just a sample ad of what would go into the New York State School Boards Association. We would advertise probably in New York State School Boards, the NSCSD and SANES, brochures, just to round that out. Costs range somewhere in the neighborhood of $400, $300-ish per ad. So it's not terrible. We could probably do all 3 of those for under $1,000 for the district. That winds up being relatively minimal cost. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes.
And you haven't spoken much about salaries. That's something that we'll do in executive session?
Yep.
Okay.
We need a salary range. So those are the decision points, right? We need a, sounds like length of process. It sounds like we're agreed the 6-month frame. Okay, I'm seeing head nods around the table. type of search needs to be decided, salary range needs to be decided, and then I've got some executive session conversation to have about potential interim candidates. So I want to be able to run that by you. Yeah, like the details, this is a draft and we'll flesh out all those details.
I got another question. So you mentioned interim, and I know we're gonna have a gap from August to December, basically with an interim. Could you speak a little on that process?
Sure. So what we would do is have the board meet with a few candidates. I have 3 or 4 candidates that are interested in having a conversation. And you would meet with them. It's a little less of an interview process because it's not as critical. Obviously, the person's going to be here for a few months. These are all very experienced people with a good track record. Can't go wrong, literally. It's more a matter of who feels like the best fit. And then we would have a board action that would essentially establish them as the interim superintendent from a period of, say September 1st through, January 1 or whatever we predict. And then if needed to go longer, it needed to go longer, and that can be amended. But process is just you interview, we decide. These are pretty standard. There's a, I'll recommend a daily rate based on the market. And then that's typically how that goes.
I'll bring you into this, Mark. Just on the cover of this, I'm not sure where this big picture was taken, but it looks like a different school district with the colors behind it. But that's at the Dome? Okay. Okay, I feel better now. Okay, I was worried I didn't, the orange makes sense now. Thought it might have been someone else.
Yeah,
Well,
these are theoretically all North Syracuse kids.
well, I know the kids could be, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. You're calling the 6-month typical?
Mhm.
It just seems like an aggressive timeline, but you think a district this size, that's reasonable? We're either gonna have them or we don't.
Yeah, size of the district shouldn't impact the process.
All right.
It makes more work for more focus groups potentially. And there will be more data to look at, but process-wise, it doesn't change things. Roughly same number of candidates, roughly same number of hours you have to allocate to interview them,
To be less invasive for a new superintendent starting January or July.
So, in a perfect world, probably July, but superintendent changes are probably less disruptive than, say, building principal changes once the school year has started. The biggest problem with a January start is the budget, but the interim will be working with Don, and we'll be able to be in a reasonable place to figure that out. There isn't going to be an interim superintendent who hasn't gone through multiple budget processes in different districts. And so, that's the biggest thing that is probably a bit of a challenge. So if the person is really identified by November or December, they can start, being involved in that process regardless. It's a learning curve, right? And it won't be easy, but you do have somebody very, very well experienced who's going to be able to help shepherd that process through.
So does the board feel comfortable trying to make a decision now on which method of search we would like to do? I don't know how you guys want to do this. Do we just want to just show a hand? So I guess around the table, how many of you would prefer to go with the confidential search? Your answer.
Okay, thank you. And like I said, it's your process. I'll facilitate either one. It's important to have clarity for me so that I can go out to talk to the candidate pool.
Any other questions for Dr. Cook?
I do have a couple of items for an executive
Executive
session, so I don't know when you wanted to do that. I can hang around or.
This should be relatively.
I do have just a general question. So does that mean that we'll have to start getting involved with figuring out what type of, when we're talking about the focus groups and that stuff, will we have to start working with you as soon as possible to start talking about what we want to hear from the community? That'll basically, we're starting now.
Right. So next steps, it's a great question. Next steps will be, I'll get the survey to Dan and to Mike. And then that'll get distributed to the rest of the board so you can start to have some input onto what the survey will look like. Our marketing team, now that we know this, will tighten things up with Lori to make sure that every picture on the brochure is is definitely a North Syracuse person, unambiguously. Um,
Been there since COVID.
But,
I
you know,
lost my season
know,
tickets, all
we-
right? Don't get me going.
we joke a little bit, but this is going to be the thing that is going to be what candidates see. So you want it to be what you want it to look like, right? And so unambiguously should look like North Syracuse. So, you know, our team is good at this. They'll work with Lori, who's great. You know, I'm not worried about it. And that way, you know, we'll get that going and we'll get that out. Yeah.
Could have your team email the revisions after you update all this
sure.
to Jill, so she can distribute it to the board, so we can that process.
No question. So that'll get going. Survey will get going. And then what I'll start to do is meet with, you know, Dan's team and the administrators, to start having conversations about process for, putting together some of the constituency groups as well, to make sure that, you know, that gets well-rounded and we get input from everybody that we need to get input from. And that can start as early as tomorrow. Well, can't start tomorrow because I'm going to be at our cabinet retreat, but I'll start Wednesday.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to some committee reports. Mark, do we have anything for policy?
Thank you, Mike. We do have a policy for approval by the board tonight on student pre-registration and registration for voters. And we are still awaiting the policy manual from Aries Point BOCES, though,
That should be coming relatively soon.
theoretically.
I know we don't have anything for legislative, but do you have any OCM board?
Again, I want to thank the board for letting me discuss what we do at OCM BOCES. Just a few things. August 6th to 7th at West Hill High School, there's going to be an equity conference. I know Dan and Chris and Don went last year when it was at Lemoyne. It's very, very good. You don't have to go for all 2 days, but it's a really good conference. And if you see the speakers that are coming, they're phenomenal. There is a tournament that we have. I gave everybody a brochure. It's a memory of a man that did a lot for adult education. It's a great tournament. It's at the Links, and they did it there last year and it was excellent. So if anybody's interested, please send in for a team or whatever. But my last thing was our graduations. Dr. Cook and our board members and our administrators went to quite a few graduations. There were over, I think there were 9 in Cortland and in Syracuse. And I know Chris Leahy went, I want to thank our team because for every one of the ones in North Syracuse, we had a representative there, whether it was our superintendent, our assistant superintendent, or our special ed. So I thank you, the administrators, for, I think it's very important to support our students that aren't graduating from here, but are graduating from our school district. So I guess the one I wanted to talk about was, believe it or not, there was a graduation for Virtual Academy. We had 90 students in grades 5 through 12 in virtual, but we had, I think, 9 to 10 seniors. And they've been working since COVID, most of them in virtual. And yet we had a live graduation. So after it was over, there was a young man from North Syracuse. I always see what districts they are. And I went up to him and I said, I'm Mr. Crabtree and I'm on the OCM school board, but I said, you went to virtual. He said, Mr. Crabtree, it was too difficult for me to go into school. I just couldn't do it. And this was a great program. That's what it's all about. So, and that's my BOCES report.
Mr. Crabtree, Dan.
Thank you. With the end of the year, not as many things going on, but we did have our second chip camp That was June 26th, 27th, and 28th. Was a huge success, and credit to Jason Clark for all the hard work that he put into that. And the students and families that I've talked to really had a wonderful time. Also, our summer program, our summer program at Roxborough Road Middle School is through BOCES Special Ed, and that has been running smoothly. And we will be starting the other summer school tomorrow, where we have students coming and that we will be hosting. So again, given the size of our district, we host a lot of programs, so that will be starting. But I do want to just say again, a credit to the district on our graduation that was held at the Expo Center. For those that attended, again, we had about 600 and either 17 or 23 graduates, and it runs like clockwork. It is just a well-organized machine, but prior to the graduation, you see all the back things happening. And I always say I want to make a big district feel small, and that's what you get to see. You see the interactions, you see the students getting together. You see the parents in the audience, but it really feels like home for many students. And I just a credit to everyone involved. I don't want to leave someone's name out, but very impressed with how that is run and continues to run. Thank you.
Just to add on that, just a special shout out to Diane Clancy for all of her work with that high school, because how she manages to do that, I still don't know, but it's great every year, and the whole team up there, and with Kristen starting out this year, kudos to her as well for being able to put that on as successful as. Board of Education comments. Anyone? Anything? Josh?
One, I did not get the golf tournament thing, and I will probably play in it, so I need one. Never mind, got taken care of. I didn't have one at my desk, so I wanted to make sure I got one. Yeah, I see it sitting over there. But anyway, I want to echo the sentiments that we all talked about with the board search. I really think it's important that, especially since we're making the decision we are for the candidate pool to be confidential, that we really need the public to step up, and we need to hear from you from the beginning. We know that you all, and hopefully there's some people listening at home. We know that you all have opinions and things that really matter. We do need to hear those things, because this is kind of the way we're going. And I really hope that the folks at home, parents, staff, everybody will step up and make sure that their voices are being heard, so we know what everybody wants going forward.
Yeah, first off, I want to really echo those words from Josh. The public input is huge from every single stakeholder in this community, from elected officials down to just everyday. We really do need to hear your voice. On another note, I just want to thank the CNS cheerleading team for hosting a great fundraiser at Big Dip I got to go to the other day. Sierra Colombini is really doing a great job with the cheer team, bringing it back to that powerhouse that it was, and that we all know that it can be. So thank you to Sierra, and thank you to the CNS cheerleading team for some great caramel ice cream at Big Dip.
Anyone on Paul?
Just a couple items, and just we go through the reorganizational committee meeting, or the meeting, whatever you call it, quickly, but I want to highlight two things that stuck out to me today. Or one in particular is item 709. We approved the board attendance at things to do with like Onondaga Madison School Boards Association, Central New York School Boards, and New York State School Boards. So just want to remind the board, or tell the board, I'm just Bob and I know participate. Mike, you've participated in the conference before. NSBA's there, as well as those other items, and we approve our attendance for that. I know people work, I know they're busy, but take a look at what's out there as far as events for NSBA and the Central New York School Boards, and any chance you can get. I'd highly recommend them. You network with other people who do what we do. We're not a huge community, and you learn things just from meeting people. I just wanted to kind of highlight that, because we gloss over it. I think it's important to know. And again, I respect people's time, especially those who are much busier than I. The second thing I want to say, part of sitting here allows me to say this that I didn't feel I could do when I was sitting up front. And you're probably going to want to pull me aside somewhere down the road and tell me I should not say these things anymore. But I'm going to, now that I'm over here. And I'm going to try and, I thought, and this is not a big deal, but I thought long and hard about this, whether I should just keep my mouth closed because I've opened in the past and regretted it. But I was sworn in today with Beth and Mark. And then you sworn in, but when I was sworn in, I swore the oath to the New York, not the New York, to the Constitution of the United States of America. And I've done that, that's about fourth time now. And yet I've sit here and recently and several times over the past year, I've been told I've violated the Constitution of the United States of America. So I just want it said publicly, if all the three people who might be watching the streaming, or maybe will watch a recording, that I do take that seriously when I say that. And I don't get offended easily, but I think I might be a little bit offended, which is why I'm saying this, that I've been accused of various things from Marxism to whatever, but I don't believe I've violated the Constitution of the United States of America. And if anybody believes anybody has here on this board, they should contact the Commissioner of Education, New York State. All I have to say about that for now. Thank you.
Well,
And if you have to pull me aside later, Sorry, Mr. Bowles.
Kudos to you. So I'm some of the things you talked about. There's a webinar. I sent the information to everybody on Foundation Aid. I'm hoping that Mr. Keegan and others will look at it because I've been told that they're farther along than you think they are on this Foundation Aid. So with this, whatever they call it, not the Rockefeller, is it the Rockefeller? The Rockefeller. So it's 12 to 1:30 this Thursday. I can't see it, but it's going to be taped. The other thing is the graduation requirements. They're now going around the state, and the closest one to ours is August 8th at Lauren, New York. So I looked that up. It's about 2 hours from here. It's near Oneonta. So I'm hoping some people go there. I cannot do that, but we need to put our input on that, on the new graduation requirements. Another thing that I sent you today is there's and I know Paul's probably done it, New York School Boards Association survey. They're really asking you some really tough questions about being on the board, and they've opened it up for a little bit longer. It does take time, does take 15 to 30 minutes to do it, but I would appreciate it as a board member that you put your input in there because they're going to do a report for us. And the last thing kind of goes along with what Dan said. This senior class this year, the class of 2024 has been an amazing class. I've gotten to know a lot of the seniors through sports, through clubs. They care about this community. They did care and they will continue to care about this community. Just an amazing class. They were so well behaved. Even their parents were behaved at the graduation, but they've given so much. We've had so many presentations this year. We just had one at our last board meeting about mental health and how they're doing it in sports and how they're doing it with the United team with special needs kids. Those kids give up a lot of their time with their friends to do these things. So kudos to this class. And I'm hoping the next class, 2025, is going to be right up there. But it's an amazing class that we had. Amazing. Thank you.
There's one other thing, if I could, Mr. President, there's one other thing that I wanted to touch on that I wasn't going to touch on tonight. I was going to touch on at a later date, but I wanted to speak about it tonight. So in the legislative world, there's a lot of memos of opposition and memos of support. And there's been a recent, within the past couple months, memo of opposition from NSBA that I disagree with, and I just want to put out there. With this rising heat in schools and with this rising heat everywhere, we need to do something to combat this in schools. I remember sitting at Gillette Road Middle School and them having to put out water jugs, and we could get up and go drink water whenever we could because of how hot it was in that school. I saw a teacher's post when we had our heat wave right before school ended where she got in at 7 o'clock in the morning and it was 87 degrees in her classroom on the 3rd floor. So I think it's irresponsible for NSBA to put that out. I think it's irresponsible for them to push that. And teachers, students, staff, I hear you. I know how hot it is in those buildings. And I'm going to do everything in my power to speak on that and get that pushed through next legislative session because it's unacceptable for NSBA to be pushing that,
They're pushing.
against it. Correct.
It's on the governor's desk still. as of Today, I thought.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Yes,
Because it was passed by the Senate and,
correct, correct. Yeah.
Anyone else? Moving on, to routine action items. Consideration of approval of the minutes of the regular board meeting of June 17th. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes? Josh, Mark, all those in favor? That is unanimous. I'd like to group the consideration of classification of students, B, C, and D together as a group. Do I have a motion to do that? Beth, Amanda, all those in favor? That is. And the acknowledgement of business office reports for May of 2024. Do we have any questions on this? No? Okay, do I have a motion to accept the acknowledgement? Xavier, Paul, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thanks. Discussion action items, the declaration of marketable and non-marketable surplus. Accept those. Beth? Sorry. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Request to create an extra classroom account for the CNSGSA for the 2024-2025 school year. Do I have a motion to accept that? Xavier, Amanda, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Resolution to create a 1.0 FTE Dean of Students at the North Syracuse Junior High School. Do we have any questions on this? Okay. Do I have a motion to accept that? Matt, Paul, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Resolution to create a 1.0 FTE special education teacher at Roxborough Road Middle School. Any questions on this? Do I have a motion to accept? Josh, Amanda, all in favor? That is. Consideration of contract award for the interscholastic supplies bid. You can see all the bids that we got on there. Do we have any questions on this? I have a motion to accept the low bidder on this. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Recommendation for contract awards for Lakeshore Road Elementary renovations. Motion to accept that. Mr. Crabtree. Xavier. All those in favor?
Could I have a question
Of
there?
course.
Please, sorry. Just wanted a quick question to Don on, when it says alternates, that, do I understand that correctly, that that would be other bidders? Okay, so I don't understand it. The third column or whatever that is. So what, when the one that's negative 40,000, what's that mean? Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah, I just wondered, when I saw the negative number, kind of jumped out, so thank you.
Thank you. Consideration of contract award for automotive supplies. Do I have a motion to accept those? Mark, Josh, all those in favor? Thank you. The recommendation to approve the separation agreement, the board has had a chance. Do I have a motion to accept that agreement? Beth, Josh, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Reauthorization to enter into Lonigan Park license agreement with the Village of North Syracuse. Do I have a motion to accept the reauthorization? Amanda, Paul, all in favor? Unanimous. Reauthorization to enter into a fuel and wash agreement with the Village of North Syracuse. Do I have a motion to accept that reauthorization? Beth, Josh, all, oh, sure, go ahead.
When you say wash, that just means like washing the vehicles?
All in favor? Reauthorization agreement with NAVAC relative to utilization of transportation center facilities. Do I have a motion to accept that reauthorization? Beth, Mark, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Reauthorization agreement with the State of New York Department of Transportation for shared services. Questions on this? Do I have a motion? Josh, Amanda, all those in favor? That is unanimous. And the NSCSD 21st CCLC grant with YMCA for the 2024-2025. Any questions on this, accepting the grant? Do I have a motion? Josh, Xavier, all in favor? Unanimous. And policy 5663, student voter registration and pre-registration. Mark talked about this earlier. Questions? Do I have a motion to accept this? Mark, Josh, all in favor? Unanimous. And a couple of retirements to acknowledge this evening. We have Anthony Bird, who's a bus driver, is retiring with 29.7 years of service. John Fredericks, maintenance worker 2, is retiring with 8.2 years of service. And Kelly Burke, a technology teaching assistant, is retiring with 23.7 years of service. So thank you for all of your service with the district, and we wish you all the best with a long and healthy retirement. Do we need an executive session before we move into personnel item A? Do I have a motion to accept personnel item A as listed? Paul, Mark, all those. Do I have a motion to accept support staff B? Josh, Amanda, all those in favor? Unanimous? And executive session before administrative report C. None. Do I have a motion? Beth, Xavier.
So we don't need an executive session. Just had a question and I don't need an answer now. I just was, when I look at, we have 5 interns we're signing and, it seems like a large number. Maybe we've done that before, that many. But I noticed 3 art teachers, one's a CT, one's a social worker. In every case, the 3 teachers are completing their teaching duties. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about how that works out specifically to those, because I noticed they're all elementary. I have 2 Roxborough, 2 Smith, and 1. I'm assuming they might be classroom teachers at the elementary level. I don't need to know now. I just was curious.
Most likely they're secondary,
Oh,
and we
okay.
we're able to front load their schedule. So then you're able to spend at least half of the day at the elementary or lower levels and be able to do that for a calendar year.
I'm just, all right, so my assumption that they were out of the elementary ranks is incorrect.
It's
Okay.
just elementary is very difficult to try to do that.
Well, that's what I was wondering, and it's just, and this is probably more of a discussion for another day, just is the opportunities, are they equitable to get an internship, I guess? Because I've always thought they probably weren't because of depending on the job the person does, it's very difficult to release or provide that front loaded and get that duty done. And I guess I'm concerned not for North Syracuse technically, but are we getting a good cross-section of experience in K-12 when we get interns? Okay. No, I appreciate that because and I didn't realize, I forgot about the summer, but yes, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
All those in favor? Thank you. And before I make the motion for executive session, I just wanted to again welcome Azariah to the board as our student. It wasn't on the agenda tonight. Normally, we have a specific section where you can say what you'd like to say. I didn't know if you wanted to take a minute just to introduce yourself. We had informal introductions last meeting.
All right, so my name is Azariah Fernandez. I'm a rising senior at CNS High School, and I was really interested in serving on this board simply because I want to study political science in college, as me and you have talked about previously. So like policy, especially whenever it's like pertaining to like education, because it's a big passion of mine. I find it to be very interesting, and that was the main thing that was running through my head whenever I was like doing my application and, just putting my energy towards, this position.
Well, we're very happy to have you. I know you're very involved with the high school, and as we get closer to the fall, I'll try to set something up with
One thing a lot of school boards do, Michael, is that the president has to report. Usually either before or after, so that you and the vice president can say some of the things that you've been presenting. We have it in BOCES. I've seen it in FM, that the president of the school board will do a little presentation.
that different from board comments. Well, again, welcome. I'd like to make a motion for executive session for the purpose of reviewing 2 personnel matters with no action to follow and 1 personnel matter with action to follow. Do I have a second? Beth, all those in favor? Unanimous, and I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Josh, Mark, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you.
Nice, awesome job. I'm so proud of both.